Welcome to Last Week Tonight. I'm John Oliver. Thank you so much for joining us. Our main story tonight concerns Algeria, a country you know so little you didn't realize that this is not Algeria, this is Algeria. Largest country in Africa, 10th largest country in the world, and currently sitting on the biggest underwater reserves worldwide, which might become very important in a few decades if the government doesn't frack things up more thoroughly than a horny Baltar in Battlestar Galactica. But fracking for gas is not Algeria's only problem. The unemployment is very high, corruption is endemic, and they have a song whose actual chorus is, quote, shampoo, shampoo, shower gel, which sounds less like a song and more like a list of recommendations for Steve Bannon. But perhaps the biggest problem of Algerians is a regime that just won't quit. It is affectionately called Al-Isaba, or the gang, by the Algerian people, and until recently this gang was represented by ex-president Abdelaziz Bouteflika, whose name literally means, and this is true, father of explosion, which on the list of reassuring, peace-inspiring names is right between son of a gun and mother of dragons. Now, Bouteflika, who modified the Algerian constitution to remain in power for 20 years, has been left a near vegetable by a brain stroke, which of course drastically hindered his ability to be president. For instance, the Algerian people have not heard him speak since 2012. Which probably sounds inadequate to people who didn't learn the value of presidential silence from having an angry orangutan for president tweeting every minute of the day. I mean, his press briefings last for hours. Hours! A briefing should be brief, Donald. It's in the name, briefing. Anyway, Bouteflika's handicapped situation didn't stop the regime from parading him in his wheelchair like a rag doll for years, and when they couldn't even do that anymore, they replaced this mute president with the portrait of the mute president. Someone should have told them that when people say a picture is worth 1,000 words, that is not what they mean. And this gave us surreal images like this portrait of the president marching in official processions, being saluted by the high military officers, being thanked and kissed in official ceremonies, being offered gifts like paintings, including portraits of himself, and also a horse, which is a weird and cruel gift to give to a tetraplegic 80-year-old man. He can't even use it. It's like offering an umbrella to Donald Trump or a comb to Stephen Miller. It's a cruel reminder of everything they cannot use properly. At this point, I'm so lost for words that I'm gonna put up a picture of an otter for no apparent reason. Now, you're probably wondering, how could this stand for so long? Well, it's complicated. The situation in Algeria is complicated, and the history of Algeria is complicated. The last dark era in that history is the decade-long civil war, and this Black Decade, as it has came to be known, is one of the many reasons that the regime was able to keep pushing Bouteflika. Every time Algerians protested for more freedom, the Isaba would remind them of the Black Decade. In fact, at the beginning of the peaceful protest, where people famously offered flowers to the police, the Prime Minister of Algeria even went so far as to say, and I quote, "In Syria, it also started with roses," which is really a mafia behavior, right? It's like saying, "Nice country you have there. It would be a shame if something happened to it." And so, in this context, Bouteflika was presented as the symbol of stability. And to be fair, you could hardly choose a better symbol of stability. Bouteflika is paralyzed, so strictly speaking, if no one pushes his wheelchair, he can be pretty stable. However, the regime soon found out that the excuse of the Black Decade works much less efficiently with the younger generation that is eager to be free and which didn't go through the Black Decade. In fact, most of them are so young they have only known Bouteflika as president. And they were the first to hit the streets, and they represent more than half the country. This happened a year ago, when after winning an election and serving an entire fourth term without addressing his people once, Bouteflika was again offered as a candidate for re-election. And to this, the people of Algeria said a resounding no. It was one humiliation too many. They took out to the streets, numbering in the tens of millions, almost 2/3 of the country, and since then have been protesting several times a week in a movement that came to be known as Hirak, or Harak, for the Arabic grammar Nazis. And this protest is remarkable for three main reasons. First, it is regular. There has been a nationwide march at least every Friday for a year. They even created a verb for it, vendredier, or Fridaying. The second reason why this protest is remarkable is it is enormous and stable in numbers, because the most fragile parts of society, such as children and the elderly, also joined the protest. And this was made possible by the third aspect of the Hirak: it is peaceful, which is very surprising for a grassroots, spontaneous, long-term movement with no leaders in Algeria. Out of pure self-discipline, the word silmiya, or peaceful, was one of the first and most relentlessly repeated words of the protesters. And they were serious about it, going so far as to offer flowers and sweets and hugs to the police forces. And whenever the policemen were cornered and surrounded by protesters, the crowd would part to open a corridor for them and let them safely pass while cheering them. At one occasion, a military brigade who was sent to squash protesters had an engine failure and was helped by the protesters that they had come to stop. The images that are coming from Algeria are insane. They have been collective breaking of fast during the month of Ramadan, singing, dancing, and even marriages inside the protest. This is what gave another name for the Hirak, the Revolution of the Smile. That and the hilarious slogans often used in known brands, such as this one using the French cheese president and saying that it stinks less than the regime, or using the name of these cigarettes as a pun for mal barré, meaning you're screwed. This one comparing Bouteflika to superglue that lasts 20 years, and our personal favorite, No Country for Old Men. Simple, elegant, clear. This is what has been happening in Algeria for the past year. The Hirak liberated speech in a country under heavy censorship. In the streets, Algerians were able to experience a level of social interactions that were absent from any official channels. So for almost a year, they held forums of debate, they occupied the streets and public spaces, and this had very important results that are arguably the needed basis for any future democratic construction of the country. The first great achievement of Hirak is that they acquired an unprecedented political awareness and an ability to structure their ideas and share them peacefully. The second great achievement of Hirak is that they slowly mended all the fractures that have been used by the regime for decades to divide and conquer. Indeed, one of the ways the regime was able to stay in place for so long is by pinning these society members one against another based on ethnicity or religious opinions, for example. But realizing that they had a common enemy, the Hirak allowed all the Algerian society to bridge all the schisms sustained by the regime for so long. They were peaceful debates between Islamists and secularists, Arabs in Amazigh, Francophones and Arabophones, and despite numerous attempts to divide the Algerians, they remained united in their rejection of al-Isaba. The third great achievement of the Hirak is the building up of an immune system for fake news, and God knows everybody needs it. Indeed, agents of the regime, both on the official TV channels and on social media, spread an almost Trumpian amount of fake news. And if you analyze the reaction of Algerians on social media from the very early moments of the Hirak until today, you can actually see them evolve into more and more skeptic and careful about what is shared and what is believed. So maybe there's hope for Fox News viewers. The final great achievement of the Hirak is that, naturally and without self-proclamations, some dissenting voices became more famous than others, which is essential because during the reign of Bouteflika, almost all political opposition was tainted and lost the trust of the people. So new faces needed to emerge from the Hirak, and they did so in a natural way. However, the regime proceeded to systematically intimidate them and put them in prison with bogus charges such as, quote, calling for unarmed assembly, which is just another word for peaceful protest, aka something every single person of the more than 20 million protesters were calling for and actively doing, and, quote, hurting the morale of the troops. Yes, you heard that right. Apparently, the Algerian army is both very strong and so sensitive that a call for freedom is enough to hurt their feelings. So obviously it was seen as a little disingenuous when the regime, that was clearly targeting every powerful dissenting voice, said the Hirak should bring forth its representatives. If you play whack-a-mole with every head that becomes visible in the crowd, you can't be surprised if people don't respond to your invitation. No one would eat at the Walder Frey & Sons restaurant. And finally, after failing to extinguish the popular movement, the military regime recently organized a vote and allowed 5 candidates, all of which come directly from the establishment. And the presidential campaign was very confusing. One of the candidates promised the bachelor degree for anyone who learns the Quran by heart and the university degree for anyone who learns the hadiths. Another one gave money to children in front of the camera. A third promised that he has a secret plan to bring all the money back that was stolen from Algeria, but that he wouldn't unveil it until after the election. And when asked, if you lose the election, will you share your plan with the winner? He simply answered, nope. But perhaps more confusing of all is that every one of them, 5 out of 5 candidates, cried at some point. They all cried. All of them, like some Miss Universe contestant. What's up with that? The election campaign was a joke. Needless to say, the rejection by the Algerian people was overwhelming. There were almost no public appearances of the candidates. The posters that they managed to stick on walls didn't stay for more than a few minutes before being torn down. And in every march at Friday, there was unanimous call for boycott. And this became even clearer when the voting was opened in advance in Algerian consulates all over the world. There were boycotts and protests in front of every one of them, sometimes succeeding in simply cancelling the vote. But despite countless Algerians streaming live videos on Facebook and some international news video showing almost no attendance, the government didn't shy away from claiming that expat voter turnout was of 70%. They even went so far as to claim that the Algerian expats that assembled in rallies in front of the consulates were actually there to support the election. Exaggerating crowd sizes, pretending that people who are against you are actually with you, kinda rings a bell, doesn't it? But the lies about the election abroad were nothing compared to what they did with the election in Algeria on the 12th of December 2019. And this was mainly through the official TV channels, from using the same images of people queuing and claiming they are from 2 different towns, to using footage from previous elections, like this one showing 7 decks of ballots when there are only 5 candidates, to this one showing an old guy in a wheelchair that was recognized by his granddaughter, who was rather shocked by this sight because she was pretty sure that her granddad didn't vote on the account that he died 2 years ago. They even displayed results like this one showing the number of voters in some towns exceeding the number of people living there. And you thought the Iowa caucus was a dumpster fire. And even in the images where you would actually see long queues, the Algerians online were quick to note that almost all of them were clean-shaven men with short hair, which, when you look at the majority of Algerian youth and compare them to the military and the police dress code, kinda gives you an idea of who these voters were. But despite all this, protesters succeeded in cancelling the vote in several large cities, sometimes walling off the entrances of the polling places with bricks and cement or welding them shut. And when they broke into some polling places before the vote had even started, they found envelopes already containing the results and boxes already filled with ballots. That and the hidden camera videos showing election fraud from inside many polling places show that this election was a farce. The generals try to act as if this is a new regime, when in fact it is exactly the same as Bouteflika's in disguise. Kinda like that Olsen person moving very fast back and forth, pretending to be twins. And yet, in the end, all this rejection, all these images, all these proofs of fraud, none of it stopped the regime from proclaiming its victor. It didn't stop foreign leaders from congratulating the victor, despite the news articles of their own countries exposing the masquerade. But more to the point, this election did not stop the protesters who showed up the very next day in unchanging numbers and with unchanging passion. A few days ago, the 22nd of February, marked the 1-year anniversary of the Hirak. And because we're a fan of Last Week Tonight, we thought this is exactly the kind of news they would like to report, isn't it? Extremely important and very funny. Because in a year, the Algerian people showed not only great democratic maturity and humanity, but also a very pronounced sense of humor. A historic struggle in its peacefulness and proportions, and a great potential for comedy with this regime. It fits all the criteria for Last Week Tonight. If you liked this little summary of what's going on in Algeria, don't hesitate to share it and subscribe. Thank you very much. That's our show. Good night.
In the description, find links to our YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. Please, you know what to do. I don't wanna beg.
Follow, like, subscribe, share, retweet, thumbs up, republish, telegram it, send it in smoke signals, scream it in the streets, tattoo it on your forehead.
And, if you're a millionaire, write it in the sky with an airplane.